Okay, welcome everybody. I hope you all had a good lunch. We had some very nice sandwiches coming in, so we are all set for the second part of the first day of our Social Innovation in the Energy Transition Conference. You not only see me, but you also see my colleague Nihit. And Nihit will introduce himself after I do some practical announcements. And then Nihit will also introduce our keynote speaker that comes in every moment. I think Thomas is also there. Hi, Thomas.
Hi, apologies for being a bit late. Arranging some technicalities, but
Yep. Yeah. Great that you're here. So you might all have already seen the social wall. I mentioned it this morning. And what I like to stress is you can post things on the social wall, but you can also press the little heart there if you like what you see, because it's nice to see also for the rest of the participants of this conference what you like and what you'd like to share. So share and like. And for this keynote now is actually a bit the same as this morning. Please use the Q&A if you have questions instead of the chat, because the Q&A, we can moderate that and then we can also see if there's an overlap in questions or not. You can also leave your name in the Q&A. What we actually do is that we are going to collect all the questions that are being posed, and we will put it on our website later on, together with the answers of the keynote speaker if they were able to answer them. But for instance, this morning, Patrick Devin Wright already said, I would like to have all the questions so that I can answer them, and then we can share that again, so that we also have a moment after the conference to get in contact with each other. Plus the Q&A, if you like a question or you see a question that you already had in mind, then you can also press the little heart there so you can upvote it. For the rest, let me tell you a little bit about the program of this afternoon. We first have this planned keynote presentation from Dr. Mathur. As we already also had this morning, there might be some technicalities and challenges to get people in here, especially with Wi-Fi issues and browser issues. So we are waiting now for Dr. Mathur, but I'm checking if he gets in. So let me tell you about the program this afternoon. From 13:30 till 15, we have, I think here, 6 panel sessions. And these panel sessions are about community energy, social innovations for sustainable housing and renovation, perceived fairness in the energy transition, artificial intelligence and the use of digital platforms for sustainable transitions, social innovation for a circular economy, and the role of psychology for sustainable transitions. After 3 o'clock, we have a little break, and then we have I think 6 sessions again. Yeah. Some of the sessions that start at 1:30 continue. So after the break, they continue with the same topic and they will have the same chair. And some of them are new topics. So you can check the program on our website to see where you want to go. And because on the website, you can find the abstract. And on the platform, so the conference platform, you can also see an overview of the program with the titles only. Let's see. After these sessions, that will be 16:40, we have a plenary closing. So I'm looking forward also to see you there. I think I've said everything, the social wall, the upvoting, the liking. And what I will do now is I will ask Nihit if he can come in and tell a little bit more about his own work and maybe also about the importance of social innovation in his work. And Nihit,
Hi, Katie.
so I will put myself on mute and I give you the floor to introduce yourself and your research to our audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaureen. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this keynote address. My name is Nihit Goyal, and I'm an assistant professor in the section on organization and governance at the Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management, TU Delft. Broadly speaking, I see my work as understanding, explaining, and promoting policy innovation for a sustainable energy transition. So for me, it was really interesting to reflect on this conference and think about how social innovation interacts with policy innovation. What role do policies play in these processes? Are policies more of barriers to social innovation? Are policies neutral to social innovation? Or are policies enablers of social innovation? And with this perspective in mind, I think it was also useful for me to think about what does social innovation mean in the context of the Global South, and especially a country like India, where the general impression is that policymaking is a bit more top-down than it might be in European context. And that's why we normally think of even practices such as public participation in policy processes, practices such as participatory evaluations as not as mainstream as they perhaps could be. So it was with this in mind that we decided to invite our next speaker to this conference and hear his views both on social innovation from the perspective of the Global South, as well as the interaction between social innovation and public policy. And now I'll briefly introduce him so that we can start with the keynote address. So it is both an honor and a privilege for me to introduce Dr. Ajay Mathur. Dr. Mathur is presently the Director General of the International Solar Alliance, a treaty-based intergovernmental organization with over 100 members. Previously, he headed the Energy and Resources Institute, or TERI, a premier energy policy think tank based in India. In this capacity, he spearheaded moves to accelerate the transition to renewable energy, enhance energy efficiency in buildings and industries, and promote circularity through both recycling of waste and bioenergy. During this time, he also anchored the annual World Sustainable Development Summits. Dr. Mathur was also the head of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, the key agency of the Government of India for mainstreaming energy efficiency in houses, offices, and industries through a number of innovative initiatives. In addition, he was a member of the Indian Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change and the Indian spokesperson at the negotiations of the COP21 in Paris. He also served as the interim director of the Green Climate Fund during its foundational period and co-chairs the Global Energy Transitions Commission. I have been fortunate to meet Dr. Mathur twice before today, and both the interactions left such a deep personal and professional impression on me that I still recall them vividly and fondly. Thank you, Dr. Mathur, for agreeing to address us today. We look forward to the keynote, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Nihit. I see in our speaker chat that Dr. Mathur is probably in the participation platform, but not yet in the dashboard platform. So we need to get him over here virtually to be able to present his work. So, yeah, can you say a little bit more about when you say that maybe because that was not completely clear to me, if you talk about social innovation in the Global South, more from a top-down perspective, where do you see that difference? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So my experience of policymaking, and especially energy policymaking in Europe, has been that there are both bottom-up thrusts, for instance, with respect to community energy, and top-down thrusts. In a country such as India, we have been talking about microgrids, decentralized solutions for renewable energy, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, given that we come from a very different context, there is still much emphasis on first providing grid electricity to a large section of the population. The country recently completed the target of providing LPG access, so access to clean cooking fuel to a large section of the population. So I think these differences in the context make it interesting to see how social innovation is perceived differently here and in the global south. So in the global south, I think we normally think of social innovation as something that coexists with policy innovation and is usually is more technologically driven than perhaps it is viewed here.
Okay, and is it because that's also out of curiosity? We do also a lot of work on co-creation or like these groups of communities, grassroots initiatives that work together for renewable energy in their community. Is that something that is, for instance, a topic of research also in India? Because maybe you know best about that, or yeah.
So it's definitely a topic of research in India. I think where perhaps we have more ground to cover in India is in institutionalizing some of these practices. So when it comes to dialogues around public participation, co-creation, co-design, my sense is that these definitely happen, but they happen in pockets and may not always happen consistently. So I think there is perhaps scope to as I mentioned, institutionalize these processes such that that involvement of the public in decision-making becomes stronger over a period of time.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I think there's more and more attention also to this cultural differences and also this comparison between these countries. We have a session also in the conference that pays more attention to this than we probably do that now. But it's very interesting. We luckily also have a lot of PhD students from different countries all over the world in our university that focus their social research on this energy topic in the world. And we have Dr. Mathur here. Welcome.
Hi. Hello. Great. I can see myself.
Yeah, we are zooming in on you. It's great to have you here. And did you hear Nihit's introduction?
Yes, I could hear you clearly throughout. It's just that I was in the wrong room, I guess. But anyway, I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you.
And in the absence of being able to upload my slides earlier, I'll upload them now. But first of all, both Jadian and Nihit, many thanks for inviting me here. Nihit, thank you for your very kind words regarding our interactions in the past. And I look forward to a good and stimulating discussion to get to. What I would want to do is to share both my learnings and the way the Solar Alliance looks at moving in the years ahead. What I will want to do is to share my thoughts with you. If I can put my panel, put my presentation somehow. Let me see how I do it. Share screen. Okay.
Dr. Mathur, I think there is a button share screen, but maybe one of the moderators can help you also.
Okay. It says you are presenting, then it says upload slides in a PDF mode. I have them in, let me just save them as PDF. Save.
Do you need help? Can some of the moderators
Yeah,
guide you?
in the bottom.
I think I'm okay.
Okay, in the bottom right, you can share your screen.
Yeah, I'm doing that now. And that entire screen. I don't know if you can see my presentation.
Not yet, Dr. Mathur.
Not yet? Okay.
If you share your entire screen and not just the window of the presentation.
Okay, should I see the entire screen? I see the presentation opened up.
You should go to the conference website again and then press the share screen, I think.
I did the share screen. I am going to the entire screen. I can see the presentation on this screen.
Sean, would it be an idea if Dr. Mathur sends his presentation by email, and can we then maybe share it? Is that also a possibility?
Yes, that's also possible.
Okay, so if you can guide me on how to do it, I will need to close this somehow. Choose what to share.
Yes, if you're still on the choose what to share screen, you could also try to share the screen again, I suppose.
I'm trying, I'm clicking on the presentation screen, but nothing is happening. There is a blue outline that comes around the window, around the presentation screen. Okay.
Maybe the best would be, Dr. Mathur, if you send it per email and maybe introduce yourself.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Let me do that. I will send it by email. Should I send it to Tuan?
Yeah.
Okay. Tuan, reply.
We have to improvise a bit. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
I'm really sorry.
No, me too.
Okay, Tuan, I have sent it.
Yeah, then the student assistants can do their magic here.
Okay. Meanwhile, yeah. So meanwhile, let me share my thoughts with you. So the first thing that we have learned is that social innovation has to be integrated within the larger development, within the larger financing, within the larger issue of how we get people to solarize what is it that they're doing anyway. So whether it is for energy access, and energy is the first thing that we hear about, but also whether it is for health or for education or for agricultural and economic prosperity or for quality of life, no matter what it is, we need to piggyback solar on top of it. We use, like you do, the word responsible investing, responsible financing, responsible interventions, not just green interventions or green financing or green investing. Why is this important? I would like, as soon as we have the slides, I would like to focus on 2 or 3 case studies. I think the most important for us is agricultural pumping. Agricultural pumping is something that is at the heart of all agricultural work across the world. This is the single most reason for the economic livelihoods of the vast numbers of people who live in the developing world. Consequently, the way we solarize the irrigation systems becomes important. Now, why is this good? It is good for the farmer for a number of reasons. Number one, the farmer has greater control. The electricity is available at times when the farmer wants, not when the grid supplies. Number two, the cost immensely reduced for the farmer. I'll give you an example. In the Indian state of Maharashtra, the cost of grid supply to a rural substation is 7.48 rupees per kilowatt hour. But if we set up a solar facility at the rural substation itself, it supplies electricity during daylight hours at 3 rupees per kilowatt hour. So compare 7.38 rupees grid supply and 3 rupees, which is the solar supply. Now, obviously, this is available only in cases where the space is available. If the space was not available, then of course you have to pay additional. It will be more than 3 rupees. But the fact that I want to leave is that locally produced solar electricity is both convenient in terms of time and more cost efficient as well. So those are two things that I want to leave you with. Because of these two reasons, and because of the third reason, which is there are no climate emissions, there are no GHG emissions. This is a preferred solution, not only locally, but globally. So whether you look at it from the point of view of the distribution company, whether you look at it from the point of view of, Juan?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. I'm sharing the presentation right now.
Okay.
Is it visible for you or? Oh, it's not visible. Yeah, it's visible. Okay. If you want to go to the next screen, you can just say something, and I will show you the following.
Okay. So yeah. I will tell you when to go to the next slide, and would be delighted if you can.
Yeah.
Shall we begin with first, second, third slide?
This slide?
Number 3. This is the one which says farmer-owned and operated solar water pumping system.
So, slide? Yeah. Is this a slide you mean? Or you want to have?
Dr. Mathur, can you see the slide in the left upper corner that you can see that the right slide is on?
No, actually, I don't see the slides. Do I need to switch something off? Because I think the share screen on, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, maybe if you refresh the page, then the slides may be visible.
Okay. I see myself, but I don't see the slides. But if everybody else can see them, that's great.
If everybody else sees them, it's great. I'm right now on a slide about farmers-owned and operated solar power pumping systems. Yeah.
Great. So let's stay on that.
Yeah.
The point that I want to make is that there are multiple models depending on the ability of pay of farmers, depending on the kinds of institutional mechanisms that exist. Because we can't create institutional mechanisms from scratch. So if there is a history of self-help groups, then we will go with the joint liability groups. If there are entrepreneurship models that are available at a rural scale, we'll go with that model. If there is a good cooperative history in the country, we go with the cooperative model. So depending on the kind of institutional structure that exists, there is a possibility of piggybacking solar onto the agricultural pumping system. Now, as I said, it makes great sense. It makes even greater sense if the electricity company is willing to buy the electricity from the farmer. Supposing solar electricity is not done at a community level, but is done at a farmer or a group of farmers level. They use the agricultural pumping for 80, 90, 100 days in a year. The rest of the time, the electricity can be produced and sold to the grid. But it will imply that the grid should be ready to buy it. Now for the grid, it is a win-win situation because they get electricity at relatively inexpensive prices and can sell it in the local areas, home systems, cottage industries, and so on. In other words, there is a possibility of creating models which are economically and financially both better off for the country and for the farmer and for the electricity distribution company. We want to ensure this convergence to occur because without the convergence, the solarization will not be sustainable. Nowhere is this better seen than in the next example that I want to share with you. Tuan, could we move to the next slide, which says mini grids have been popular in many parts of the world? Okay. Now, one of the key things that we have noticed is that about 60% of mini grids, which were set up to provide local electricity, were abandoned within 6 months of installation. Why? Many reasons. But the main reason is that there was a lack of community ownership. In most of these mini grids, they were set up with support from either government programs or bilateral programs or philanthropic aid programs, and it was set up, and then whoever set it up went away. As a result, there are no mechanisms to ensure that we go ahead with a system that has the ability to be managed. Most of these systems, when they were bought, especially in the recent past, the donors always add a requirement that they have to be maintained for 3 years or 5 years or something, but try to get it. The difference in bargaining power between the local communities and the suppliers is so large that they never come because the supplier knows that these communities are not the people who have bought it or will buy it again. In other words, one of the key learnings is that the ownership and the procurement of these solar systems must emanate from the communities themselves. Now, this is difficult because many of us sitting far away think of solar systems, think of local communities, think of the lack of technical capabilities, which is real, which happens, and therefore believe that The communities are best served if they are provided this energy and there are other people who take care of the service. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. I am myself a small farmer who has a solar pump on my farm. Now, this is about 50, 60 kilometers away from the nearest town. But whenever I need maintenance, I need to get somebody from that town. I am able to talk to the manufacturer and get maintenance people. Other people can't. This is a huge problem because of the way the procurement is structured, the ownership is structured. So I would like to suggest that unless we change the way in which these solar systems are procured, we will not be able to move to a system which works. Tom, can we move to the next slide, which is local entrepreneurs and the cornerstone of successful and widespread deployment of innovative solutions? Now, for many, many years, as Neith introduced me, I used to work for the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI. And TERI used to manage a program called Lighting a Billion Lives, in which the entire goal was to piggyback solarization for development activities that people were doing anyway. So, for example, there were programs on sewing. There were programs on education, on livelihoods, and we built on that we solarize it. There are 2 or 3 things that we learned. Because of the high cost of solar, it is very difficult for many people to own these systems. So what is important is that there is a fee for service model. There will be, there are huge differences in the buying power of people. So some people will buy it, others will buy it as a service and therefore pay as we go along. Now this is important because what it implies is that the people who we empower to provide the local services should have adequate working capital so that they can invest in the systems and provide the services. Because providing services is very different from selling products. We also learned that technical partners are important. It is these technical partners who provide the kind of technical support that is needed for 2 things. One is they know the people who are built into these programs on sewing or education or livelihoods. And 2, they have the technical capability to help solarization. They are present and they have the technical capability. But this is a cost. It's not a huge cost compared to the cost of the system, but it is a cost. And this is a cost which cannot be passed on to the users. So an upfront meeting of these social investments is important. So whenever we start a program, social investments become essential. How do social investments convert into commercial investments? What we've learned is that as these occurred, we found that vendors of solar equipment found it very useful to get the feedback on what are the kinds of products, what are the kinds of services that make sense, and they tweak their products to meet those needs. Now, as they learned from the feedback, as they made products that were more acceptable, as they built the relationships, the supply chains to meet the needs of the local entrepreneurs, then they could directly interact. That's the point at which commercial investments became viable. So that is the flipping from social investment to commercial investment that occurs. But that initial social investment is essential. So what I'd like to do is to sum up the kinds of learnings that we have had. If we can move to the last slide, which is the timely injection of funds by the investor community is crucial.
Let's try
I
it
would
right
like
now.
to leave us with 3 or 4 thoughts which I hope the case studies have brought up. The first is that the expectations of investors has to change, and for each project it has to change with time. So we look at the need for risk capital. We need to look at the need for working capital, so that service for a fee model, particularly for communities with limited ability to pay, can be put in place. The second point that I'd like to argue is that as we move into this area of, let me call it responsible investing instead of just green investing, we need some kind of index on which investments can be measured. There is an old adage which says, what is measured is what is managed. I can speak hoarse from rooftops about the need for responsible investing, but till we are able to move to an index, this will not happen. I urge the community to develop these kinds of indices so that with an appropriate amount of discussion, a discussion on what is doable and what is easily verifiable, we can move to an acceptable system across the board and across all geographies. This, I think, is very important and helps match entrepreneurs with investors. The last point that I would like to make is a set of investing guidelines. The first point that I'd like to leave you with is that we need to move first to social investing, but make it in a manner that helps us move to commercial investing. It is important. We cannot stay in a social investing mode forever, but directly moving into a commercial investing mode is also not possible. The second message that I'd like to leave you with on this issue of financing is that working capital is essential, especially if you are looking at service, fee for service kinds of models. As we look at these, it becomes important both for the investors and for entrepreneurs to be able to move towards standardized equipment. Now, this can happen during the social investment phase, when we learn and we move towards a standardized equipment. Once you do that, then procurement is possible. Then the local entrepreneurs can do procurement. As I said earlier, I think it is important that procurement is carried out by the local entrepreneurs than by anybody else. I'd like to end here. I want to thank you for your attention and would love to enter into a discussion on how we can move forward with responsible investing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mathur, for your enlightening talk. You raised so many pertinent issues related to what we discuss almost on a day in and day out basis, such as thinking of society as the owner of the problem or as the owner of the need, transformative social change as the larger goal of the energy transition, responsible innovation and investing as a key pillar of the path from here to where we want to be. You also spoke about community ownership, and in the discussion on energy democracy, we often have this debate on how do we think about citizens? Do we just think of them as users of a service, or do we think of them as partners in the work that we're doing? And you spoke, of course, about the ecosystem approach to managing an innovation, where investing, entrepreneurship, maintenance, business models for addressing all of the challenges that are encountered are all important and need to be thought through and through across the supply chain. There's several questions that come to my mind, but if I may start with a broader question that reflects on your experience across energy efficiency, solar energy, and climate finance. What would you say is the role of public policy in this process? And do you think there are tensions between social innovation and policy innovation, or are they two sides of the same coin for you?
As I said earlier, social investment is essential. If we don't invest in social investment, we can never follow with commercial investment. Let me give you an example. In India, we have for a very, very long time have provided LPG cylinders for cooking in urban areas. But in rural areas, it was almost absent. What made the change? It was a recognition by the Prime Minister, by the minister concerned, that means at the highest political levels, that having cleaner kitchens with less pollution is a social investment. It helps in productivity. It helps in the better lives of people, and it helps in a lower pressure on the biomass collection from the environment. Once you look at a social investment, then what happens is that the government finds it much more comfortable to invest in the infrastructure that is required for the provision of LPG cylinders in rural areas. Otherwise, the entire question of the companies was, I create this infrastructure, nobody is picking up the LPG cylinder, how do I recover my investment? Consequently, the short point that I want to say is that social investments occur as a result of public policy. Now, which comes first is a chicken and egg situation. But in my view, the idea of social investment comes first, and that is translated into public policy to the area that you are looking at. So, all of us, whether we are wearing a thinker's cap or whether we are wearing a policymaker's cap, have a role in moving the agenda ahead.
Mathur, one of the discussions we were having before you joined us was whether the role of social innovation differs between, say, the global north and the global south. And one of my observations there was that perhaps, at least in the European context, the role of the public in the policymaking process is perhaps better institutionalized than it might be in some of the other countries in the global south. Would you say that's a fair characterization? And if so, do you think there's a need to change that?
Nihit, this is a public policy question that has bothered the community for decades. I think it is much more a matter of the political, regulatory, and policy history of a particular country, and sometimes even smaller geographical jurisdictions. Why? When you talk of the global north, I presume you're largely talking of Europe. These are small, homogeneous countries. Now, you look at the US, there are classic books which talk about how the ideas are developed, how the winnowing of ideas occurs at the level of either state legislators or the Congress, and how ultimately ideas are picked up. So there may be a huge public support for an idea. It may still not get picked up because pork barrel projects are of importance. But the point, and similarly in the global south, there are all kinds of countries. You can look at the Cubas of the world, and you can look at the Chinas of the world. So again, you see a spectrum. But one of the points that I will agree with you, Nate, is on the role of information. The availability of public information on public policy and on the kinds of choices that are made are much more easily available in the global north than the global south. One is because of the channels of communication, but the second also is because of the number, of what people consume, the communication channels that people consume in the global south. So many years ago, I read that even in the mid-16th century, India was not a literate society, but a literacy-aware society. Newspapers used to be read out in the 16th century. Handwritten newspapers was written, circulated, read out in public fora. Now, this is very different from a place which is entirely dependent on hearing from my neighbor. I would argue that the availability of the internet and the use of the internet has largely been a positive thing. Yes, it has been negative also, because you get all kinds of information without an adequate responsibility associated with that information. Because of this, the levels of public chattering has certainly increased. Whether it is influence policy or not, it's too early to say. But what I will argue with you is that we see spectra of public participation versus more black box models for policy formulations in both the global south and the global north. Though you're right, they occur more in the global south, largely because of information asymmetries.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. That nuancing definitely makes sense. We can't think of the global north as homogeneous, and neither can we think of the global south as homogeneous. And as you mentioned, there is a spectrum of public participation, both, I guess, in terms of the types in which the public participates and the purposes for which the public participates in both of these. We have a question from the audience, I'll first read it out. The question is, how does the social aspect of the energy transition make sense in countries with more top-down political or transition contexts? What does social acceptance or innovation mean in specific geographies? Would you have a take on that?
This question is unfortunately too close to a line that I draw in my role as an independent thinker and in my role as the head of an intergovernmental organization. Because as an intergovernmental organization, per employee, I would not like to comment on the policies of member countries. Nevertheless, I think what is certainly true is that in every society, social innovation and social innovation of energy on the energy side essentially starts at the grassroots. And no matter where we are in the world, innovation, business innovations now occur almost everywhere. I can't think of any society except possibly one or two where business innovation is regulated. What I've also seen is that in almost every geographical jurisdiction, once a business innovation takes off, then yes, timing may be an issue in different countries, but then policies change so that that particular innovation can be quickly replicated or multiplied. So I'm sorry, this is not as good an answer as I would have liked to give, but I'm trying to skirt that line that I drew for myself.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. So in my mind, it still makes sense. There are two key points perhaps that you mentioned there. First, if we probably think of this not from a purely academic lens, but think of it in terms of what's happening on the ground, then you suggest that grassroots innovation happens in nearly every context, regardless of the political environment. And that could be in the form of a business innovation or a social innovation.
Correct.
And second, that this is a cyclic, a co-evolutionary process in a way. So there is business innovation or social innovation and policy innovation that happen together and in a way perhaps reinforce each other in that process. So it's not about whether one happens or the other happens. Thank you, Dr. Mathur. Going back to a more concrete idea that you mentioned as some of the next steps that you highlight, and perhaps these would be challenges for the academic community as well. Do you have initial thoughts on how we might go about developing an index of responsible investing?
Yeah. So the first issue is the market that you serve. So any index would need to be differentiated by that. And it could be at a very high level. It's a rural market or an urban market. Is it for people who are below the poverty line, or those who are able to afford, and so on? So that becomes the first question. The second criteria has to be, does it create jobs? So those which create more jobs per dollar invested are clearly more responsible than those which don't. But the third point that I would like to suggest, and I think there's a lot of research needed on this, is the role of partnerships. I have learned, and this is an empirical statement, that when you have multiple agencies, I'm using agencies in the word that there could be businesses, there could be government agencies, there could be financial institutions, and so on. When you've got multiple agencies depending on each other, so there is a cascade, there is some kind of them coming together for making something happen, they are more sustainable. Now, in my view, that is more responsible investment. There is obviously the greenness part. And greenness is not just climate change, but also whether it is locally, it leads to local environmental benefits. So jobs, incomes, partnerships, and local environmental, those are the kinds of things which I believe should go into a responsible investment index. But, you know, I am saying these pure from a practitioner's point of view. I would very much like the research community to focus much more both on the scope as well as the definition of these.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. I do see you as someone who wears two hats, the hat of an academic and the hat of a practitioner. So I'm not sure if you are saying this only as a practitioner. And of course, it's perhaps no coincidence that the ideas you propose resonate very much with academic communities working on issues such as just transitions and energy justice. I could go on for a very long time, but I recognize that you are very busy and the subsequent session has also started. So once again, I would like to thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to listen to you on this topic. I also want to highlight before we end the session that as a gift to your participation here, we have planted an oak tree in the northeastern region of the Netherlands that will, from what I understand, be visible on Google Earth in about 10 years from now.
Wonderful. This, I think, Nate, is exactly the kind of index that we want, which is easily verifiable. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank you. Thank you also for joining us. Please feel free to go to the next sessions of the conference. Thank you, Dr. Mathur.